2 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Would you stand for the reading of the word? Let's stand together. And the sons of the prophet said to Elisha, "See how the place where we dwell with you is too small for us. Please let us go to the Jordan, and let every man take a beam from there, and let us make there a place where we may dwell." What we're talking about here is a building project that the younger crowd is wanting to do. Is everybody with me? And so Elisha, the older prophet, said, go ahead. Gives him his blessing. And then one of the young prophets said, "Please consent to go with your servants." And he answered, "Okay, I will go." Don't you appreciate the invitation? Young people, don't ever forget to invite. It's a good thing. It makes the older crowd feel good. You're supposed to say amen right there. I'm just telling you. And he said, "I will go." So he went with them, and they came to the Jordan, and they cut down trees. But as one was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water, and he cried out and said, "Alas, master, for it was borrowed." So the man of God said, "Where did it fall?" And he showed him the place. So he cut off a stick and threw it there, and he made the iron float. And therefore he said, "Pick it up yourself." So he reached out his hand, and he took it. An amazing story. We have talked about this story one time several years ago. I brought you a message on this. Dr. Ricky Moore has done some excellent writing on this passage that is just exhilarating. But I'm going to look at it through a different lens today than what we talked about it before. And I know I'm going to be on it a few weeks because it has a lot to say about our transition and what we should be doing and what we should be taking with us while we're clearing land and chopping down trees and moving dirt. It has something to say about us, and we better keep our eye on the ball while we're doing all of that. Would you say amen to that? Amen. Lord, make it easy to bring forth your word today. In Jesus' name, and everybody said amen. You may be seated. Speaking of transitions, lately your staff conversations have been about what do we take and what stays. We plan on moving to our new office space, as I just shared with you just a moment ago, and it's kind of funny. Things that you'd walk by every day and didn't even think a whole lot about, someone gets rather sentimental about it. Have you ever moved and had your spouse get sentimental about things? I am going to move right along very quick right there. So as we plan on moving and looking at new office space, what do we take? What do we leave? As we talk about a new family room and ministry center and plan on transition, what should we take? What should we bring with us? How should we look at it? What should we do? Some things, I should say, we can leave behind. I think there's things that we ought to leave behind, right? We ought to leave behind. The purchaser of this property wants most of the FF&E. Now that's a fancy way of saying furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And he wants most of that. So don't go get sentimental on me with your chair. Would you please not do that? Just don't do that. You'd be surprised, I'm telling you. And we will leave most of that behind. A young lady called up a pet store and said, "Could you please send me 10,000 cockroaches?" "What in the world do you want with 10,000 cockroaches?" asked the clerk. "Well," replied Rachel, "I'm moving out of my east side apartment today, and my lease says I have to leave the place in the same condition I found it." Some things we need to take, and some things we need to leave behind. Now, I'll need to explain what I mean. Remember, while pastoring in Denver, I've had some meetings this week where I've shared this little story. Debbie and I were privileged to go to Denver, Colorado as 28-year-old pastors. We were rather young, according to today's standards when it comes to lead pastors. We went there, and the Lord blessed us with a church that had about 80 people in attendance, and we were there, and we were excited, and we were going to hit the ground running. I think Kyle might have been 6 years old during that time. Shane was 9 and John was probably 3, and we were a young family. And there we were. We found ourselves there in a big metro city, in a metro area, and God began to bless us. And to be honest with you, I can't really tell you why. I don't say that to attempt to be humble. I could not tell you all of the reasons why God blessed us. Others may have had their ideas, but God blessed us greatly, well beyond our expectations. So much so that we ended up in a little sanctuary that would seat 180. We ended up having to do 4 services within 3 to 4 years on a Sunday. I was waking up at age 31, 32 with headaches on Monday morning because I preached too much and too hard and I had no common sense. And so that was the way it was. And the Lord opened up a door out on Highway 25, and that may not mean a lot to you here, but that Highway 25 and I-70, as well as 6th Avenue, is the place where all 3 major highways converge in Denver. 2 of those highways, those 2 major highways, are the crossroads in the entire state of Colorado. And right there sat a church. Marilyn Hickey, some of you may have heard of her. She had a church there. It was a large church. Well, she had outgrown that massive facility, in my opinion at that time, a huge facility, and she had went south of town and bought a mall of all things. A mall had went defunct and bankrupt, a new mall that was only a couple of years old. She bought the whole mall and moved the whole ministry probably 15, 20 miles south in the southern side of the Denver metro area. Well, it was such a blessing to us because we ended up buying that building. And we were so excited, I'll never forget it, being able to go to one service in a sanctuary that would seat 1,500 people, and we were elated. I'll never forget it. We raised some funds, and we not only bought it, but we were able to remodel some areas and do some things, and the Lord continued to bless us. And it was about 2 or 3 years into that I began to hear things. It started a little bit with leadership, and then I began to hear a few from others, and it was respectful. It was just a little thing I began to hear, and I'd hear this. They'd say, something's different. It doesn't feel like the same. It feels like things have changed. And I'll be honest with you, at first I thought, what in the world could have changed? We're preaching, we're teaching, we're taking offerings, we're singing, we're worshiping, we're doing all of those things. I don't think we've compromised any excellence. What in the world has changed? And the more that I begin to study that and look at it, I begin to feel like, you know what? They're right. As a 32-year-old pastor, I had taken my eye off the ball. And some of those things that made us who we were and made us, as to what I would define as being a great church to be a part of, some of those things that weren't so obvious to the common eye, we had taken our eye off the ball. And I made a commitment to the Lord that if we ever run into a situation where we ever had to do this again, that I would not take my eye off the ball, and that we'd figure out what it is that makes our church what it is, and that we would define those things and make sure that when we move, we'll pack up those things, every single one of them, and we'll figure out how to carry them wherever we're going. And we'll not only do that, we're going to figure out how to broaden them and do them with more excellence and do them better than we'd ever done them before, because that's who we are. Do you believe that Westmore has some good things that we need to take with us? Let's give the Lord praise if you believe that with all of your heart. Back to our story we just read, I find it interesting that these young prophets were wise enough to take some things with them. This little story is tucked away in the Old Testament. It's this unusual story that we read about and we've talked about before, that it's very fascinating. There's so many things in here that when you just read through it once, you can miss so many nuggets, I think, that the Lord would have us to get a hold of and embrace. The question that I want to leave you with today as we begin building and start planning on a move, what things should we consider taking with us? What things should we consider taking with us? The young prophets were wise enough to take some things with them. So what should Westmore take with us. The first thing I want to put in a suitcase and carry with us when we go over there and unzip it and pull it out, it's this principle. I want to take this with us, our wonderful families. I want to take our wonderful families, because these wonderful families are what make up the Westmore family. And the Westmore family is what makes up this family room. I thank God, and I think I can say this. If not every day, almost every day, I thank God for the faithful Westmore families that make Westmore Westmore. Westmore's not like any other church. Others will come in and say, hey, it's like this church or that church. I know this church. I know the DNA of this church. It's unlike any church that I pastored, and God has raised it up for such a time as this, and I want to take every Westmore family with us as we do business in the kingdom. Can we give the Lord praise for Westmore families? It's a good thing. When I speak of family, I mean family in the purest sense. I want our family atmosphere. I've already had a couple of people say, I hope we don't lose that. I want our family atmosphere. I want our relationships. It all revolves around relationships anyway, doesn't it? Doesn't it? All those things that make us a family, that thing called family that's held us together through good times and bad times. And I want to tell you, in 17 years of being here, we've had some good times and we've had some bad times. Don't say amen to that last part, but we have. And you know what? We've survived those. And you know what? God has been with us as we've navigated through those things. And I believe He'll give us the internal fortitude as family members to navigate through whatever we face in the future. Do you believe that? Family. We can't talk about intergenerational ministry unless we understand family and unity. There's people that would give their right arm to have young people and students fill up an area of a church. Or when you go out on Wednesday night, it's fascinating to see the place covered with students. Or you go up there in the children's area and see all the children. There's churches that would give their right arm for that. But they really don't. They want what it looks like, and they want it there so they can be proud of it like a trophy, but they don't want what it takes to get there. They're stoved up. There's only one way of doing it. Bless God, that's when I got saved, and that's the way it's always supposed to be done. That's not the way it's going to happen around here. We'll always make room for one another. Well, you ought to say amen there, because that's what we've got to do. We have to make room for one another. Family is made up of not just grandpa and grandmas, or not just young people. Family is made up of moms and dads and children and youth and young couples and grandparents and great-grandparents. So when you talk about intergenerational ministry, you're not just talking about the young people. You're talking about pops and mom. You're talking about everybody in between that makes up family. Aren't you thankful for family? It's a good thing that God gave us. It's a beautiful thing. I remember my family reunions. My family reunions were very unique. They really were. My family was so big that we had to schedule the whole park on a Sunday afternoon just to hold our family. My grandma had 15 brothers and sisters. Ooh. They didn't know when to stop, I guess, but anyway. 15 brothers and sisters. I have a cousin who's part of that family. I don't know where he's at. He's somewhere in here because I saw him follow me in. I have a cousin that's been part of this church, Randy Ringler. The Ringler clan on my mother's side had 15 brothers and sisters. So when we go to family reunions, I mean, it was big. And every year there were additions, I'm just telling you. It was a big group. And when I say 350 to 400, I am not kidding. They booked the whole park. And we'd go down there near Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it was just always annual time. We'd have fun. We'd play together. We'd fuss together. Very competitive together. I know that shocks you. We would work together. We'd work hard together. But it was family. It was a family I was proud of. And frankly, that family wanted you to like them and wanted you to love them, but if you didn't, that'd be your problem. They're big enough to take care of the problem. That's just the way they operated. It was the family. You might have disagreement or an issue with one another. Listen to me. And this probably was a weakness. I'm going to be honest with you and say that right up front. They would have disagreements among themselves, but you let somebody on the outside mess with somebody on the inside. Now, I'm not just blowing smoke. I watched it in action, and it wasn't pretty. And it really wasn't right. It's something that I had to deal with as a boy growing up because I didn't think it was right. There was too much temper. There was too much justifying what somebody did wrong just because it was family. Am I making sense? So I don't say that with any pride, but I will tell you the family bond and the commitment and the covenant was very, very powerful and strong on my mother's side. It was such that they were either hellions or they were on fire for Jesus. And when they were on fire for Jesus, they were doing good things and great things and supporters. They donated the land for my home church. They were that kind of people. But my God, when they got off, and I don't say that lightly, when they got off, they needed prayer. When they got off track. And so you know all those idiosyncrasies about your own family, don't you? You know that there's good things about your family and there's things that aren't so good. And my family would always take care of their own business. They took care of their own business. If they had a problem or a crisis in the family, they didn't feel like they needed a lot of input outside the family. That's why when we went through a crisis several years ago, had to work through some things, I wanted to control the talk. I didn't need people out there at lunch deciding in other church families what we were doing right or what we were doing wrong. Frankly, I didn't give a rip what they thought. What I cared about is what you thought about it. What I cared is how we were handling it, because the Westmore family will take care of its own business. The Westmore family will be there for one another. We'll do whatever we got. You say, that sounds seclusive. Oh no, my Bible says, take care of the household of faith first. Take care of your household of faith first, and then you do business outside. Let's give the Lord praise that family is a good thing, and we can care for one another. It's a good thing. We got in trouble in school. If a family member did wrong or got in trouble, I'll never forget this. You didn't have to worry about the school correcting it. The family corrected it. I wasn't going to tell this, but one time I was at a place that I shouldn't have been. Lord help me right now. I don't want to confess too much. I was somewhere I should not have been. I was 16 years of age. And so I'm not going this alone. I didn't ask him for permission. I don't care what he thinks. He's sitting in the room. He's a cousin. And we were somewhere we should not have been. And we were not partaking of some things that were there that were illegal. And frankly, I don't know that I knew those things were going to be there. And the police showed up out on a beach. We were out there at a lake. Thought we were private. And kids were all over from the high school. I know what you do sometimes. Anyway, kids were everywhere. And all of a sudden, police cars by the groves come flying in from everywhere. They didn't warn us with sirens. All of a sudden, lights were on top of us. They were dragging us to cars. People were throwing things they had in their pocket under the cars. And I was scared to death because I suddenly realized there was all kinds of illegal things there. My uncle, who owned a wrecker service on my mom's side, hemmed me up. He was a big man of stature. I'll never forget it. They released us. You know what my fear was? My fear wasn't of the law. My fear was, I promise you, I'd have rather had to deal with the law any day in the week. My fear was not of the law. I'd have rather had them take a billy club and beat me half to death. And I would not have been as afraid as I was going to be of my family. I remember my uncle, the police, he had a lot of good friends because he was the one they would call when they needed cars yanked out of the ditch. I remember my uncle walking up to me in town a couple days later. And he said, "Cal, if I ever hear of you in a place like that again, I'm going to rip you apart." And he was very capable of doing that. He was a large man. And I said, "Yes, sir, Uncle Bill." And he said, "I'm not going to tell your mother." But he said, "I better never hear of you in that kind of place again." I look back at that. I thank God for family. I thank God for family. And that's the way I feel about you. That's the way I want you to feel about one another. Some of you have been here a long time. Some of you are rather new. But you know, as we grow in relationships, one of my dreams is this will become a family like none other. Not out of comparison or competitiveness. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a true family where we can fix things together. We can go through hell together and come out on the other side. We can climb mountains together and stand on top and celebrate together. Iron will sharpen iron. We'll figure it out, and God will be with us. That's my dream for the Westmore family. Let's pack it up and take it with us. Could we give the Lord praise for that DNA that's in us? Yes, 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 yes. I was recently asked, where did this intergenerational family value business come from? I can tell you right now, I'm not going to get through this message. It's going to take me a few weeks. Where did this intergenerational Westmore family begin? I remember coming to Westmore from 17 years ago, a little over now, a few months, over 17 years. I remember trying to figure out what is the DNA of our church. I didn't want to come and just pastor the way we pastored in Princeton, North Carolina, which was a tremendous experience. I didn't want to come and pastor the way we had pastored in Denver. I wanted to figure out, how can we customize ministry to fit Westmore? To do that, we had to figure out where we've been. And thankfully, you had a previous pastor who took notes and he would write things down. His name was Dr. David Bishop. I miss him, don't you? Brother Bishop had written a few things down about intergenerational ministry. He and Doc Fisher and a few other young men had consulted and talked about the idea of doing what they could do to develop an intergenerational ministry. I read that, and I had remembered years before having I can't say it was clear, but going through seminary and having Ricky as a professor and him talking about Malachi 4:6, and I had a certain amount of that in my spirit, enough so that in Denver we looked for a bigger piece of property over the years as we continued to grow, and frankly it was too expensive. We couldn't find anything. We were there 10 years. So I had a little bit of that in my heart, but never really, when we left Denver, never really brought that back. It was probably a flicker, a light flame. And when I read that here, that began to rise up within me again. I remember our leadership meetings, early leadership meetings, where we talked about, where's Westmore going? What is Westmore about? I remember that coming up strong and having some conversations about it. And I'm going to tell you, as I was considering all of that, Robert Greene was driving me crazy. Now, he's not here today, so I'm going to take a lot of freedom. Fields of Faith, portions of that event is still kind of going on, so a lot of our people are with that. But Robert began to drive me crazy. He could be very persistent. And he would come into my office, or I would come to my office, and Patty would drop off these videos. Back then it was videos. They're antiques now, but they were videos. And the videos would sit on the corner of the desk, and I would see 180 facility. I would see this youth ministry that was going on, this model out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I'd take a peek at it, and I would try to ignore it, and Robert would come in for a weekly meeting as I was trying to get to know the staff better, and he'd say, hey, did you look at that video? No, I hadn't had a chance yet, Robert. I'm trying to get my arms around what's going on around here. Have you looked at that video over and over and over again, weeks? So one day I did, and I thought, that's really cool. It's great stuff. But Westmore's not in a place we could do that. We're not financially able. I've only been here a year and a half. There's no way it would be political suicide. It would be pastoral suicide to try to go out there and build a building on that property we just bought. There's no way we can do that. One thing led to another. Finally, one day, after about another half a year, probably 2 years into this, he says, hey, I'd like you to go with me to Tulsa. Would you just take a trip with me, Pastor? And then if it doesn't speak to your heart, well, forget about it. Well, I like that because I needed him to stop bugging me. So we We're crazy. We were younger then. We just jumped in the car and drove. We drove across states. We drove all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it was either on the way there or on the way back. We drove all night. And we got out there and we looked at this youth ministry. We arrived on a Wednesday afternoon so that we could participate with a Wednesday night thing. And I have to tell you, it rocked me. It absolutely rocked me. I watched young people practically run to the altars. There was 2,400 young people in that youth service that night. I watched God move in such a mighty way. I began to observe how they discipled. I looked at their discipleship material. We explored, we looked, we got down into it, and it was an amazing thing. And I'll never forget, as I come back, I thought, wow, now I know why he was so pumped about this. This is amazing. But then, how could we ever do that? The financial pressure, being so new, we came back. I don't know, probably 6-8 weeks went by, and I was doing some reading on 180. I don't know what it was, come across my desk, and I saw something there that said that in Georgia, about an hour away, hour and a half away, was a 180 facility. I had no idea. I thought they were more west. And I thought, you know what we ought to do? We ought to get some of our leadership together and just go look at it. So some of our guys got together. Fathers. Everybody say fathers. Fathers got together. Fathers. And a few young guys got together. And we got in a couple vans. And we drove to the 180 facility on a Wednesday. And we experienced it. And I'll never forget Bob Williams walking up to me when we walked in the door, and he was looking around like this. And Bob said, Pastor, this is amazing. And I said, it is, Bob. I said, I tell you, I just came from that Tulsa, Oklahoma experience. It's incredible. You just wait till the night and watch these kids get ministered to. It's pretty incredible. And then look at the discipleship material with me. It is amazing. So we looked at the building and facility, walked through it, stopped for dinner on the way back. Everything happened the way I thought it was going to happen, and we got back. And I was sitting at a restaurant with them, and Bob said, when we get back, I want to talk to you. Well, I thought he meant tomorrow, later. It was late at night, because we had to drive back from late Wednesday night youth service. So we get off the van, we come in here, and all the guys leave, and Bob hung around afterwards, and he came to my office and knocked on the door. And I knew Robert had went to his office, and I'll never forget this. Bob walked up to my desk and did like this on my desk. And he said, Pastor, I need to ask Robert Green to forgive me. He said, I had no idea where Robert's coming from. He said, I listened to him talk about youth ministry, and he said, my granddaughter is in the youth ministry. And he said, our kids deserve to have something like this where ministry can go forth. So what we did is I said, Bob, Robert's right down the hall. And Bob had big old tears in his eyes. And he walked down the hall all the way to the end, the last office, and he walked into Robert Green's office and walked up to his desk, and he said, Robert, I want to ask your forgiveness. He said, I haven't understood where you're coming from. And he said, sometimes you unnerve me with all these big ideas. And it seemed like you're always asking for this and asking for that. But when I see what other young people and other churches are doing and having that kind of impact in their community, he said, I want our church to be that way. Can I tell you, it was 2002, 2002 and a half, 3, somewhere in there. That began to break what I would call some generational issues we had, and we didn't even realize we had them. And it wasn't just the folks in Bob's friendships that didn't see it, but the young people had issues too. Robert would admit it. They had issues too. And we began to have a breakthrough. And it was during that time we began to articulate that we want an intergenerational church. It was before it was popular to talk about. I'm not saying this trying to pat ourselves on the back, but everybody's talking about it now because they're divided. It's too late to talk about it when you're divided. We should be talking about that when we're strong. Am I making sense? And that's why we bought a property, so we could have an intergenerational campus. We've got to pack up family, the generations, and we have to take them into our future, all generations. Don't you ever, ever, ever act like an older person doesn't mean something to this family. Never. Honor your father and mothers. It'll affect how long you live. Grandpas and grandmas, don't you ever devalue one of these. They're not only our future, they're today's church. Be careful. We need everybody and everybody in between. Now let me just close with this closing thought. You know what Bob did? The elder man in this story took a tree, said, chop down a tree, and lay it across the water. And when they laid that tree across the water, the tools, the axe head, came up off the bottom of that water, that pond, and floated all the way to the top. If you'll do some study on this passage, and we're going to unpack this more next week, you know what the old man did? He took the cross and he laid it down over a lost tool. And forgiveness and reconciliation are all wrapped up in that cross. And the depth, the cross is designed to where the depth was measured and the distance was measured. And the cross, the power of forgiveness and unity, pulled that tool back up off the bottom of that lake. And they reached out and grabbed the tool that would allow them to build and be strong. One thing we can never forget, the cross is what keeps this unity, this tool of unity, this tool of intergenerational ministry, this tool of valuing. Jesus values the young people, and Jesus values the elderly, and he values everything in between. We need to keep that cross in the middle of everything we do. We need to keep the cross in the middle of everything that we do.